On today's episode of the Everyday Leader podcast, join Tate and I as we interview Dr. Michael J. Durnin. Mike has dedicated his career to higher education, serving as a football coach, instructor, and administrator at multiple colleges and universities. He's now the president and founder of Via Crucis Leadership LLC. Mike is a dynamic speaker who brings passion, humor, and heartfelt stories to his audiences. He really emphasizes leadership and skills based upon his handful of L's, which we get into the episode today, and strives to really create a foundation for those who are looking to navigate what he calls the chaotic world. And you'll hear us talk about that a little bit too. Mike also serves as the president of the Chris Norton Foundation, no relation. And Chris Norton was featured in the acclaimed documentary 7 Yards, which you can see on Netflix. Super excited for this conversation to bring it to you. And Mike has a lot of great insights. This is going to be one worth listening to more than once.
Welcome to the Everyday Leader podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization. Welcome to the Everyday Leader podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization.
Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Leader podcast. We're super excited to have Dr. Mike Durnin with us, and he's had a career in higher education. He's served in multiple colleges and universities, spent time as a football coach, an instructor, an administrator, and we had a conversation recently, Mike and I, and he just felt like one of our type of people. And so we're excited to bring him on and kind of learn the lessons of leadership that Mike has learned throughout his life and throughout his career. So welcome, Mike. We're excited to have you on today.
It's great to be here, Drew and Tate, and truly a pleasure. I love speaking with individuals and groups that are looking at leadership. It is such an important topic in my book, and I believe, and the big reason for this is a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to be a leader. I don't have that type of title. I don't have that type of role. Yet each of us leads ourselves. And so in essence, we are all leaders, no matter what type of title we have, what type of role we fulfill. So, and I believe very strongly in the skill set that goes into becoming a leader is such that we all have the opportunity to develop those skills over time. When I define leadership, my first words out of my mouth are going to be, it's the skill of, which means just like there's a skill of walking, there's a skill of swimming, there's a skill of throwing a football, there's a skill of writing a paragraph. If there's a skill involved, it can be improved. And so for each of us, the skill of leadership can be improved over the course of time and through a consistent emphasis and concentration in those skill sets.
Awesome. I love that. And we also believe that leadership isn't necessarily come with a title or isn't a requirement to be a leader. So a skill of, what would you say leadership's a skill of what, Mike, in your mind?
Sure. A skill of positively inspiring others to enthusiastically work towards the goals of a common good. And I want the positive. I think the positive is very important. Is that, the positive and the common good take you away from some leaders in our history of this world that probably were on the negative and not for the common good. So I want to make sure those two words are, phrases are in there. And I really like, I used to say influence, but too many people kind of came back and said, Mike, sometimes when you say influence, it gives a bad connotation. And so I've kind of flipped and used the word inspire because, as I was taught a long time ago, you inspire others and you motivate yourself. And so I want to make sure I'm inspiring. And when we are enthusiastic for anything, my guess, Drew, you and Tate both are enthusiastic about, hosting podcasts. And because of that, it becomes a great venture for you. And so I want to make sure I'm bringing enthusiasm. Of course, the football coach in me will come out. All right. That's part of that passion that we seem to have in that profession and so that one's easy for me. So that's the skills I'm talking about. And I love working with groups. When I speak with young people, I ask them this question. start naming off skills or qualities and traits of great leaders, people they admire. And we'll fill a whiteboard. And then I'll ask the question, okay, how many people in this room right now have all these skills? And no one will raise their hand. Then I'll basically look at it and say, okay, now I want everyone to raise your hand, because each and every one of you have all these skills. You're just at a different point on the continuum compared to somebody you admire. And yet you have the skills. You just need to develop them now.
So, Mike, when we were getting ready to jump on this, you had mentioned you're still teaching. And one of the courses you had mentioned was ethics. And so I just want to get your take on how that ties and what's your spin on leadership and ethics and the importance of that role in it all.
Sure. I love that. The class is really a great class. And we use a book it's written by Rick Kite. He talks about the 4 ways of thinking to lead an ethical life. The first aspect is you need to find out the truths. What is the absolute truths involved? Not some outside group. What are the actual truths involved? And that takes some time. You got to ask a lot of the right questions, which I think a great leader is going to do. And you find out both sides of the story, all too often. And we see this divisiveness in our world today, where people think about only one side of the story instead of finding the truths from both sides. So that's the first part of it. The second part is being able to outline all the consequences that can come from a decision. So as you look at making an ethical decision, what are the possible outcomes? Being truthful as you look at those outcomes. And then you need to look at fairness. Okay, what's for the common good? Remember, that's already in my definition of leadership. What's for the common good? All right, the greatest common good, because we're never going to please everybody. So what's going to be, and we need to recognize all sides when we look at these consequences and we look at fairness. And then the last part that comes into Rick's 4 ways of thinking is character. What are our virtues? How are they playing into this? And when you take time to look at discussion items in that manner, first of all, if you're respectful of each other, you have great discussion, very informative, great learning experiences. And you probably can come up with some solutions. I know you can. You're going to come up with some solutions that maybe not please everybody, but most everybody can accept. And so I think there's a great tie-in to ethics. And I'm actually part of a community group. I help out. I volunteer with a group here in Wisconsin called Leader Ethics, which is looking to have, in essence, political leaders lead a more ethical life so that they can be better for the common good of all people.
So what's a good definition or your definition of ethics?
Ethics is applying a mindset that investigates all avenues of thinking and seeks to have a decision made for the common good that is based upon fairness and character.
Interesting.
I like that.
Yeah, letting that one soak in for a second.
Mike, could you maybe just talk a little bit about your career and your journey up to this point in your life for our listener, so they can, and maybe along the way when you started to see yourself as a leader?
Sure.
Kind of how that happened.
One of the things in some regards, I got it because of some of my experiences early in life. In high school, I was a captain of a football team. Okay. Believe it or not, I'm actually an old quarterback. So I played quarterback in high school. I played quarterback in college. So you kind of get thrown into somewhat of a leadership position in that regard. I got into coaching right away, have traveled around the country, so to speak. A lot of small schools, but there's a lot of great things that happen in small Division III, type schools. And so the leadership part, I think, has been there throughout. But what has happened, I think, in Warren Bennis, who is kind of considered one of the forefathers of leadership development, he talks about in his research crucible events. Crucible events being something that is unexpected and changes or adds to your mindset. And I start thinking about, and I actually didn't read his stuff until probably about 5 to 10 years ago. And when I thought about that, I'm thinking, okay, here are experiences that happen in my life that definitely were crucible events. I was young. My younger brother was killed in a car accident. Okay. I had just gotten off the road from a recruiting trip and I got this call. This is before cell phones, of course, from my mom telling me the news. So that was a crucible event. And because family, it was big. I mean, big part of, is still a big part of my life. I still remember when my father passed away. Okay. And he was basically about the same age I am right now. So, still fairly young. And I still remember he was still sharp as could be. Just he went in for a heart disease surgery and never came out, and to live through that. I still remember even earlier than that. I was at a college that shut its doors down 2 weeks before Christmas. Here I was married with a 6-month-old daughter. What are you going to do? How are you going to go forward? I still remember, and the story that I share with a lot of people is the Chris Norton story. No relation to our audience, so they know to Drew Norton here. But
It's not
Chris,
my brother, for those that know me.
yeah, the Chris I know was a young man who played football for me at Luther College in Iowa. And in 2010 was running down the field on a kickoff, went in for a tackle. And the next thing you know, he's lying motionless on the ground. Come to find out, he fractured C3 and C4. At the time, they basically said he has 3% chance of any movement below the neck. And I remember, you want to know, this is part of the crucible events, and these are things that happen. And I hope this event doesn't happen to anybody I know, but for anybody. But I still remember going to the hospital that night, and we drove up to Mayo Clinic and got there. I'm walking down the hallway with my wife, and all I could see near the waiting room was one figure. It was Chris's mom. Now, 8 months earlier, this was the same mom I sat with at lunch and promised that I would take care of her son, just like every football coach is going to do in the recruiting process. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I got to Deb. And I remember, she could have turned around, yelled at me. She could have hit me. And I probably wouldn't have blamed her for any of it. But she simply turned, looked at me, gave me a hug, and said, Mike, they're saying 3% chance of any movement below the neck, but we're going to believe in that 3%. You want to know what leadership is? Leadership is belief. And sometimes that belief is you have to walk by faith and not by sight. None of us knew what was going to happen, but we knew how we wanted to go forward, from how they wanted to go forward, and everybody connected to the story was going to go forward, believing that greatness was going to happen. Well, Chris has never regained his full walking capabilities. He's walked with assistance, which is talked about in the books he's written. There's a beautiful documentary movie called 7 Yards that outlines his story, in which the 7 yards he actually walks with his now wife down the aisle after they get married. So that is there, but yet he's still basically in a wheelchair. But yet he has positively inspired. See, he lives the leadership part. Positively inspired thousands upon thousands of people through his books, the movie. Our foundation has raised over $2 million since 2012. The accident happened in 2010. 2012, we formed the foundation. We host a wheelchair camp every summer where we have about 25, young people in wheelchairs and their families. So all family members are part of this as well. And the foundation pays for the whole thing. So they come and enjoy a week of, laser tag, horseback riding, zip lining. And these are young people who are in wheelchairs, but this facility we use has the apparatuses, so forth, that they can allow these young people to experience that. And so leadership has been a part of it. And I think it's, when you think about leadership, I heard this phrase a number of years ago, because I truly believe in servant leadership. Okay. Well, service is love made visible. I'll repeat that for our audience, so to speak. Service is love made visible. A great leader leads with love. And so that is one of the foundational pillars that I talk about all the time is how do we serve? How do we lead with love? And love does not mean you don't have the tough conversation, but how do you do those tough conversations? That's more important. I hope that answers your question there, Drew. I kind of went off
No,
a little bit there, but
I like that idea of the crucible that you've talked about a couple times. What do you think is that what is it about that crucible that maybe helps you see someone really as a leader versus not, versus those that don't come through that? And
Sure.
yeah, curious about that. Your thoughts on that.
Well, when I speak with leaders throughout the years, and I still love talking to people in leadership positions and all people about leadership, I talk about crucible events and they'll think about it and say, yeah, I went through this, I went through that. A number of years ago, a gentleman named D Hawk, who was the CEO for Visa. Okay. And I think Visa is somewhat popular, very common. Most of it have a Visa card sitting in our back pocket. Okay. But Dee talked about what he termed chaotic leadership. And it was basically taking chaos and order and fusing it together. Well, the science of fusion is you're taking molecules and you're bringing them together to make a stronger molecule. If you think about the things we experience in our lives, the chaos, the crucible events, in the midst of us trying to have an orderly life, here's my schedule for the day, etc. When you fuse those things together, when you embrace those crucible events, not that you have to like them, but when you embrace them as the learning experiences they are going to be for you, you become stronger. And that is the fusion between chaos and order. So that's how I look at that on a daily basis. And when I reflect upon each day, some days the crucible events are real tiny. And some days, like October 16th, 2010, when Chris went down in the field, they're large.
Yeah. Kind of jumping back to Chris's story and just kind of the thoughts that were going through my mind listening to that is just the sheer number of people I would define as leaders that were probably involved in the chain of from that time to where it's at now, from the doctors, from yourself to the people that helped set up the foundation to his mom, himself, and just probably countless others that showed up as leaders to help the outcomes we're seeing today. And to me, that's always so cool to see because it's these, in some cases, micro interactions that, help build the entirety of what we see.
Here's some of the greatest stories that came from the situation was how a group of young men who are all freshmen in high school. Now remember, they're 18, some almost getting ready to turn 19 years old. And they're sitting there having this happen to a friend they had only met 2 months prior to.
Freshman in college, right?
Freshman in college.
Yeah.
And here they are, and they're traveling back and forth to Rochester, which is about an hour and 20 minutes away to the hospital. It's a couple nights a week to go visit Chris. When Chris came back to school, those were the guys that were changing him, putting his clothes on. They were changing urine bags. All right. You think about that and the growth and what it takes to do something like that. That's leadership. That's service. Okay. Of the love made visible.
And that would be an example, as you said, embracing chaos.
Exactly. It's that whole presence of being there. Chris shares a story too. The one doctor said that Chris had these phantom movements. Chris didn't believe it and actually was able to move his toe on Thanksgiving Day, only a month and a half after this tragic event. And the doctor from that changed his perspective of how he dealt with patients. Pretty significant, I think. So there you go.
It's real interesting because I don't know if I told you, Mike, we have a group or community or mastermind, whatever you want to call it. And we were talking about what we were going to discuss this week. And I think Tate made the comment that life has been chaos lately. We said, let's talk about chaos this week. So I just think it's, just interesting that's what we're discussing right at this moment. That's what we're going to talk about with our group today. So
timing's everything, right?
Yeah. I guess maybe a little bit more in that. How does a leader, how do they actually navigate that chaos then? What's some tactical ways, maybe if we have a listener who's going through some chaos in their life right now, how can they show up as a leader and navigate a trial or chaos or a crucible?
Oh, 100%. Here's the first thing I think needs to happen. This is part of what, when I mentor young people, and I'm in the process of mentoring a couple young people right now. Number one is the methodology of staying calm. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. Things happen, a crucible event happens in the moment. Mel Robbins talks about, the 5 count. You count backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. And she talks about this all the time. I think it's a great thing. Others are going to have a breathing mechanism. Okay? One of the things that I try to work with young people in terms of staying calm is you have to anticipate chaos is going to happen. You don't want bad things to happen, but you have to anticipate it's going to happen. So how are you going to stay calm when it does happen? And I talk to especially a lot of young coaches about this, because things are going to happen in every contest. So first thing is stay calm. Second aspect, you're going to need others. None of us do any of this by ourselves. None of us lead by ourselves. None of us operate in this world by ourselves. And sometimes you're going to need, I use a visual a lot of times of a group of people on a mountainside, and one person's reaching like, I need help. But then you have another person who's reaching back down for them, saying, I'm here to help you. You got another person hang on to that person saying, I'm helping that person. And then you have a couple other individuals on top of the mountain that are kind of giving, the thumbs up encouragement. Well, in our lives, we need all those people. We need those that are going to help us. We need those that are going to encourage us. And guess what? We need to be those other people as well. And so we need to be able to help others. We need to encourage others as we go in our paths. So the second mindset, I think, goes into this. You start with being calm, then you're going to need others. The third aspect is what I call no matter what. And the no matter what relates to what I call my vision, my why, my purpose needs to stay there. I need to reflect upon that continually as I'm experiencing chaos. My why is very simple. Okay. And I talk about my why being my home address. Okay. That's my house. So, I'm going to run home to my house for support. And it's basically to be one and know every day in every way, living life, creating a transformation of self and others to be better. That's my why. It doesn't matter whether I was coaching, teaching, an administrator, a father, a grandfather, okay, a community member. That's my why. That's my home address. And no matter what, I'm not going to forget that. I need to fall back on that. Then I think the other thing is we all need to have a mindset of, I need to be able to go the extra mile and then some. If anybody thinks life is simple, all right, tell me what drugs you're using, because I need some of those. Okay. It's not simple, but we need to be able to go and then some. Both of the no matter what and then some, there's some great stories. I just saw a picture of Nelson Mandela on social media this morning. Somebody was posting one of his quotes. Nelson Mandela, no matter what was happening, never lost the vision he had for South Africa. Even though he spent 27 years in prison, never lost that vision. That's a no matter what mindset. To be able to go and then some, there's some great stories that you look at various Ironman stories, the Hawaiian Ironman, and there's some people who've been willing to go and then some to be successful. Not necessarily win the race, all right? But, a true champion is the one who's actually willing to do their best by stepping into the arena. Not necessarily winning. They're willing to step in the arena. That's the champion. And then the last part I talk about is having that positive attitude and effort. We control 2 things in our life, our attitude and our effort. Where are we at with that? So that's kind of like the basic toolbox that I use for handling chaos.
Probably could spend hours unpacking that too.
Probably.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to kind of go the other direction, though. You talked a lot about the positivity and helping others and being that force, and I truly believe how important that is. And I think sometimes people need the skills on handling the other side of that, whether that's family, friends, environments that are maybe bringing you down. And how do you identify, sort through, navigate? What insight can you give our listeners to how you'd handle that?
Well, it goes back to the needing others. And one of the things, I think it's presence. It's authentic presence, not trying to solve everything, but those individuals that are authentically present in our lives, and the ones that we feel, yes, we can be vulnerable. Great leaders are vulnerable. They're willing to admit their mistakes, and they can say, I did this wrong, or I need help today. And when you do that, I think great things can happen. But that presence, that authentic presence, holy cow, we need that from all people. So, and just realizing for some, it might take a short time. to step it back up again, some of it's going to take a little longer. Don't put a timetable on it. And then, of course, for me personally, that's why every day is going to have what I call my reflection, my prayer time, my silent time. Now, I think it's true. I might have shared this with you yesterday. I'm not sure. But, silent and listen have the same letters in the words. So when we're silent, we can listen for answers. And all too often, we let the noise of everything around us take over. And I think if I could advise people on one aspect, have time in every day where you are silent and in silence and listen for answers. Whether you are faithful or you're religious or not, doesn't matter. But listen for answers, and you have to do it in silence. Whether that's for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, doesn't matter. Find time to be silent.
And that does mean not staring at your phone, right?
Exactly. No screens, no nothing. For me, one of the best things you do, and it took me decades to learn this. Go sit somewhere and look at the skyline. Look at nature. Look at, on western Wisconsin here, we're on the La Crosse area, we have bluffs. Okay, they're not mountains by no means. They're bluffs, but they still have a beauty to it. Or I could go down, we're right on the Mississippi River here. So I could go sit and look at the Mississippi River in silence, and then I think that promotes the listening.
Yeah, I've found sometimes it's turning off the radio on a long car drive. Maybe you can't meditate and close your eyes when you do that. And sometimes it's so to Tate's point, it's so easy to be quiet, but have noise going on, whether it's on your phone or somewhere else in your life.
So, when you said that, it reminded me, because here's what I did. I talked about to my staff my last 5 years. So when I was in higher ed, I was dean. I was part of the president's cabinet, but I was the on-call administrator. So if there was a suicide attempt happening, if there was a major argument happening, whether it's a medical emergency, whatever the case may be, I was the one getting called. And I lived, and of course, one of these calls going to happen between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. Mm-hmm. Now, where I lived, I was about 5 to 7 minutes from campus. Every time I got a call like that, when I drove to campus, I made sure the radio was not on. I wanted silence. I wanted to take some deep breaths as I was driving. I kept my eyes open because I didn't want to run into anything. Sorry. But, but I kept it silent so that I could have that calmness and be ready for just about anything when I walked on, got out of my car and walked into the situation. So even those 5 minutes of silence in a car can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I hope our listener, I hope you're taking notes or listen to this episode on repeat. Lots of great nuggets Mike's sharing with us. One question I wanted to go back to when you talked about those 4 steps that I thought was really interesting is just that idea of relying on others. Because I almost feel like sometimes this idea of leadership is that you have to do it alone. That to be a leader, you've got to be, you talked about showing or being authentic and being vulnerable. And could you talk a little more about the importance of relying on others as a leader and how to surround yourself with those right people?
Well, finding the right people, John Gordon has a lot of great things about getting the right people on the bus and get the right people in the right seats and all that. But, for me, it's like and I talk to young people, when you empower others, okay, it's not that you just you need others, but you have to empower them if you really want to make a difference. Give them the opportunity to put magic into everyone's life. And the reason I say that is because we all needed somebody to empower us along the way, to let us fail, to let us learn. Because if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be where we're at today. So somebody else had to empower us. If we want to really be a great leader, we need to empower others so that we are developing leaders for the future. And to me, that was, when I got into higher ed administration, the last few years of administration where I was at that president's cabinet level, I still remember the president when he asked me the question, goes, "Mike, how would you like to do University a favor?" And I said, "Sure," because the president is asking you a question like that. You only have one answer unless you're ready to put your resume together. I said, he goes, I want you to be in charge of student life and you're going to serve in my cabinet. And I said, none of my training is in that realm. He goes, I don't care what your training was. I know how you think. I know how you process things. I know where your vision is. I know what you believe in. That's all that matters to me. Are you going to be perfect at this? No. You're going to make mistakes, but I'm going to stand behind you as you make those mistakes. But just be authentic. Just be yourself. Okay. Don't try to hide anything. Just boom, put it all out there. Well, him doing that inspired me to do that for others as well, to give other people the opportunity to, quote unquote, make mistakes, to learn, to empower them to make decisions. And it didn't mean I was going to be step away and do nothing. Still there to support. I still think if anybody's in a leadership position, I learned this a long time. I had mentors that taught me this one. When you meet with people as a leader, people that are working for you, one of the very first questions you should always ask, what do you need me to do to help you do your job better? You're there to serve. And so we need to be able to do that. And we all continually need to realize chaos is going to happen. People are going to fail. But fail is just the first attempt in learning. So there you go. I hope that answers your question there, Drew. Great question.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Well, as we're getting close to wrapping up, one of our favorite questions to ask our guests is, what would you want to be remembered for, Mike?
As I look at it, of course, I'm at that age where this is becoming a little bit more, personal. But really and truly, as I think about it, as someone who cared about others, who truly lived a life seeking to create a transformation of self and others to be better, and I speak on my handful of L's, which is my foundation of leadership. And I'll share that as kind of almost like a closing, is I truly hope people remember to keep their minds open, their hearts open, and their souls open as they continue to learn, continue to laugh, continue to listen, continue to live, and continue to love. And if you do those handful of L's, you will be blessed by a bonus L, the L of legacy. Not necessarily or just the legacy you leave on others, but more importantly, the legacy others leave upon you.
It was learn, laugh, listen, love. Get them all.
Got live in there as well.
Live and love.
There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, really good stuff. Maybe one other question too, Mike. Any podcasts, any books, any resources you'd recommend for someone looking to explore the topics we've been discussing today?
There's a book. Yeah, there's a lot of books out there that I've read. I got a library full of things here in all kinds of avenues. There's a book by James Hunter called The Servant, and it's written probably 20 years ago, I think, but I think it's still relative today. I actually had the opportunity to listen to James Hunter speak probably almost at least 15 years ago. The messaging, when I look at the words, and I actually went back this winter and reread the book. And so much of what I believe in is actually in that book. And it's one of those nice short reads right there. But, The Power of Habit is a great book. I think is one, we have different habits. Anything by Warren Bennis is good. Robert Greenleaf. Those are the people involved with servant leadership and leadership at the core of what has now transcended. I am a huge Simon Sinek fan. Have all his books, listen to his. One of the great things I've had the opportunity, I still volunteer to do this. I mentor high school seniors at various schools around the state of Wisconsin. And I do this virtually. And one of the requirements I have them do is listen to Simon Sinek's Start With Why and to listen, to that so that they have that idea. The other person that's really, really good, that sometimes gets forgotten, is Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit.
Yeah.
And I think that is a wonderful book for everybody to read as well. She has great TED Talk as well, but I mean, the book goes more in depth, of everything. So those are some of my recommendations there.
Thank you. Those are good ones.
Oh, and how can if we have a listener that wants to get connected with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way for me is just on LinkedIn. That's where I am at. Look up Mike Durnin, and you get the acronym afterwards, DMIN, which is a doctor of ministry. That's how I got the doctor in there. And so I know I'm the only one with that. There's other Mike Durnins, I think, in there, but Mike Durnin, D-Man, and not demon as a bad way. Amen. All right. So, but that's the best way to get a hold of me, right through there. And trust me, if somebody says, "Hey, I need help," I give out my cell number. My cell number is in more places. It's unbelievable.
It's awesome. Well, Tate, any last thoughts you have today?
No, you got the big questions there at the end, and I just love this conversation and the insight Mike's shared with us today. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike, for joining us today. And yeah, really appreciate the thoughts and insights you shared about Crucible, the chaos, the steps, the L's. A lot of good takeaways that I think our listener can apply, and that I'm planning to implement and apply in my own life. So, and to our listener, today's the day.
Thanks for joining us on the Everyday Leader podcast. If you're ready to take your leadership journey even further, subscribe to our weekly newsletter for more insights and practical tips. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram to stay a part of our growing community. Just follow the links in the show notes. If this episode impacted you, please help us spread the word and share the link with a friend from wherever you're listening.